All right, so the last thing, oh, morning. All right, so the last thing we did in our last class was we created our first table. And we did that using a create table command. What we're going to do today is we're going to basically create a whole database. And we're going to start to query that database. And the database that we're going to query is a grades database. They're actual grades, but the names have been changed to protect the innocent. So I scrambled the student names and things like that. But I actually did pull grades from a very real class that I taught. And we're going to do some analysis on those grades with these anonymous student names that I've added in place of the real students. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do, if you guys could bring up your Microsoft SQL Server Management Studios, you'll be able to follow along a little bit here. You know, I'm not going to expect you to do all the things I do, but you can try some of these things yourselves as we go along. And the first thing that I'm going to do, well, first of all, I'm going to point you to our Canvas page. If you go to our Canvas page under this lesson, which is lesson 4, I believe. Yeah, lesson 4. No, yeah, you'll see database load CSIT-213 spring 2020 grades v1.xls. Okay, you can click on that and it will take you to a page where you can download that file. It's an Excel file. So you may want to download that because we're going to use that file for this class. Okay, and the first thing that we're going to do in our database is we're going to create a new database. You guys are going to create it. You're going to call it grades. I'm going to call it grades too because I already have my grades database loaded and I don't want to take a chance of messing it up. So I'm going to create a new version of it. I'm going to call it grades 2. And I can do it by right-clicking on the database thing in SQL Server and hitting new database, and that will do it through the interface. But another way that I can do it is I can just create a new query, and I can do this in SQL. And I did this last time. I think it's create database, and I'll call it grades 2. I'll call mine grades 2, and that's it. You need the semicolon. You don't if you only have one SQL statement, so you don't need to end every SQL statement with the semicolon if you only have one. But I'm a creature of habit, so I type it in, okay? But when I run that query, I can now, I've typed that query and I can now hit execute. And hopefully I've done it correctly, which I have. And if I go and refresh, I'm not going to save this query because I don't need it. But if I refresh my databases, I right-click on databases and hit refresh, you'll see that I've added a new database here, grades 2. And it has some information in here, that Microsoft SQL Server maintains. I'm not going to worry about that right now. But I've got this grades 2 database. Now, when you're building a database, there's something very important that you have to do as the first step in building that database. Does anybody have any ideas on what that might be? No ideas? You got to figure out where your data is coming from. I mean, I'm going to do some data analysis on some grades. And in order to do that, I had to get some grades. And I loaded them from Canvas. But the other thing you have to do, the second thing you have to do when you build a database, is to what data. That means you have to check, make sure it's correct. You have to reformat it if necessary. In my case, I had to anonymize the students. So I did that. I conditioned the data. That's what I did before I'm ready to load this database. And you'll see how I conditioned the data. Let me show it to you. Here's the data. I have 4 tabs here. My first tab are the grades that each student got. As I said, I wanted to anonymize the students, so I assigned each student a number. And then instead of using their real names, I just generated a bunch of names from the most popular first and last names, male and female, and I randomized whether they were male and female. So I built this table of names, and information about the student, what class they were taking, what section of the class, whether it's 2, 3, 7, or 11. So I anonymized the student names, and I added a table that showed the grade ranges, 0 to 60 is an F, 60 to 70 is a D, 70 to 80 is a C, etc. And I also added a sheet that had the classes and their date and start times and end times. Okay, so I created my data and I scrubbed my data and I made sure it was accurate. And the other thing I did was, there were 28 assignments in this class, so I gave each assignment a unique number, 1 through 28, or 28 graded items, I guess I called them, rather than assignments, because some of them were class participation, some of them were exams, and some of them were assignments. So, this is the data. Now, this data isn't very good data for a database, because if I took one of the assignments, I have to change it every place it appears for every student. So that's not how I want to structure my database ultimately. So I kind of condition some of this in Excel, but I'm going to have to continue to condition. I loaded it into my server database. And you may ask me why I didn't do it in Excel. Well, some things are easier to do in Excel and some things are easier to do in SQL Server. So I decided to, do that particular piece of conditioning in SQL Server. But, this is the data that I'm going to be working with. Now, you guys have a project later in the semester, a team project, where you guys are going to be building a database. And I give you a number of data sources that you can use, existing data sources, things like FBI data or CDC data, or, if you want data, a good place to look for data is from the government, because the government generates like massive amounts of data. So you guys are going to find that data, and you're going to decide what data you want to use, and you're going to condition that data just like I conditioned this grade data. But I'm using this by way of example. All right, so let me close the spreadsheet because I can't import it if it's open. Well, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to right-click on my new database, my grades 2 database, and you'll see this thing called tasks. This is all of what I'm doing here. Anything that I do here that's not SQL is specific to our database management system. But in this particular case, the task I'm going to do is I'm going to import my data. And Microsoft gives you a very nice wizard to do this. And it asks me what my data source is, and my data source in this case is Microsoft Excel. It asks me for a path to that file, which is right here. I'm going to open that file. And my first row has column names, so I'm going to leave that checked. And then I go to next. And where do I want to put it? I want to put it in SQL Server Native Client. And you guys are lucky because your computers use Windows authentication. I have to enter my authentication information here because of the way they set up my OCC computer. So I have to enter my username and password in order to import this. And then I hit next. Copy data from one or more tables or views. Yes, that's what I want to do.
Professor.
And which tables do I want? I want classes, I want grade ranges, I want student data, and I want student grades. These other things are things that I used to massage this data that I hid in these spreadsheets. So those are the 4 things that I want to import. And then I hit next. And then it asks me, do I want to run it immediately? I don't know why I wouldn't. And then I click finish. And Microsoft SQL Server does its stuff, and you can see how many rows it transferred for each of these tables. And you can also see what it named them. It put a $sign at the end of the sheet name just to show it. Yeah. Yeah, so for that, you scroll way down to the bottom, and it's SQL Server, native SQL Server client.
Professor?
Yeah, Michael.
I'm not sure if I can see your screen.
Oh gosh, I'm sorry. I forgot to share my screen.
I didn't want to disrupt you.
No, thanks for interrupting me and letting me know. Okay, so what I did was I right-clicked on this, I clicked on tasks, I clicked on import data. It asks me the data source. I picked Microsoft Excel. I picked the file path where that file was, which was here. I clicked next. It asked me for destination, and I scrolled all the way down to the bottom here to SQL Native Client. I had to enter my authentication information. You guys generally won't have to do that. And then copy data from one or more tables or views. And then I picked the tables that I wanted, which were these four. And then I hit run immediately, and I hit next and finish, and I was done. So that after I
Where'd
did
you
that,
get where'd you get the data and stuff? Where would that be at?
yeah, where I got the data, you can download it right here under lesson 4, the second.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Michael, for reminding me that I didn't have my screen shared. All right, and after you do that, once you do that, you can expand these tables or the tables area, and you'll see that it imported those 4 tables. And it names them DBO dot table name, which stands for database object dot table name. Okay, so, when you import it, you don't have a lot of control over the data types that they use, so you don't, everything got imported based on what SQL thought you wanted the data types to, SQL Server thought you wanted the data types to be. I want a little bit more control of that. I want to be able to define my tables explicitly that I want to use for this. So what we're going to do now is, these are kind of our raw data files. We're going to create our real tables. And to create our real tables, we have to look at the data model for our database. So, we have this student data table. Let's start with that. That has an ID. It has a last name, a first name, the gender of the student, and the class that they're in. And that class is a foreign key. I've underlined it because it's a foreign key. It points to the class in classes. Okay, so let's start by defining that student data table. So I've already written the query, so so I don't make any syntax mistakes or things like that that might slow us down. So let's look at that create student data query. There it is. It's a create table query. And it says that the ID is an integer. And it's not null. It cannot be null. That means it has to have a number in it. And identity 11 means that it'll be auto-numbered as it's imported into the table. Okay? So that's essentially auto-numbering. Each record of student data will have a different unique number, and when it gets loaded, it will be incremented. The number will be incremented each time because of this identity 11 attribute. Okay, so that's something special that I'm doing with the primary key field of this, because I never want the primary key to be null. And I want the primary key to always be unique, so I want to make sure that I'm assigning a unique number and incrementing it. Yes, sir. Oh, how did I pull up? I had this written already and I saved it out, but if I just, yeah, you can just type this in. Okay, so that's the first field. It's an integer. It's not null. The second field is the last name. I said last names are not going to be any bigger than 40 characters. That was fairly arbitrary. I just happen to know that none of the last names are any bigger than 40 characters. If you're worried about that, though, you can make it bigger. You can make it 100. We'll make it 100.
How'd you open that?
That we don't have any extremely large last names. Sorry, Michael, you had a question?
Yeah, how'd you open the student data thing? I didn't get that because I was trying to do the other thing.
So wherever you save the file to, when you do that import, you go to tasks, import
I
data.
did that, and then import. Okay.
Okay, all right.
I think I did that, but then what do you do after you import it?
So one more time, tasks, import data, data sources, Microsoft Excel. You find the file by browsing to the file. Then you hit destination. The destination is the SQL Server native client. You can use Windows authentication, but I can't. So it will give me a warning. I have to use SQL Server authentication. Then you hit next, copy data from one or more tables or views, and then I selected the 4 tables that I wanted to copy. Hit next, and hit finish, and it imports that, okay? And if you missed it that time, I'm gonna have to refer you back to the recording for the class, because I really need to move on. All right.
Okay.
The last name I set is 100 characters variable, though. If it's smaller than that, it'll store it as many characters as it is. Likewise, first name. The gender is just 1 character. It's either M or F. Classes, as many as 20 characters, but probably less than that. But the last thing I do in this create table statement is I explicitly identify the primary key of the table. And the primary key of this table in this case is ID. Okay? So that is my SQL statement. And I can run that. And when I run that, it's completed successfully. And now I can refresh my table list. And I'll see I've got that additional table that I just made, student data. You know, that's my real student data table. It's the one that was loaded from Excel for me was called student data with the $sign after it. Okay. All right, so let me give you a chance to catch up with that. Anybody have any questions on this so far? On the syntax of this create table command? Okay. So, you know, I'll save that out. You know, I'll save that query. It'll ask me if I want to save the query. I'll say yes, and I'll save it back out to where I had it. That's fine. And now I'm going to, but you know, this student data table has nothing in it. It's empty right now because I haven't loaded it with anything. All I did was define what the format of that table is. So what I want to do is I want to pull the records out of my Excel thing that I loaded and load it into that student data table. And to do that, I'm going to use a different query. It's called an insert query. So let's find the insert query here. It's right here. And I'm going to insert my student data. And the name of the table that I'm going to insert it from is student data $sign, right? Guess I called it something else last time, but now it's student data $sign. Okay, so here's the syntax for the way that I'm going to insert this data to my new student data table. It's inserted into the name of the table that you're inserting into, parentheses, the fields in which you want to insert the data. So that's the first part of the statement. And the second part of the statement is essentially selecting or projecting. Projecting is a better way to think about it. But it's essentially projecting the fields. Yes, sir. You have to right click on tables and select refresh, and it'll refresh it. now I'm inserting into this. And the first part of this is an insert command. And, if I wanted to, let me double check my syntax to make sure I do this correctly. Yes. Okay. If I wanted to, and I didn't have data, instead of doing this, I could insert values, and I could say Weiss, would be the last name. I could say Jonathan would be the first name. I could say gender, male. Actually, I'm sorry, I forgot. I need to use single quotes, not double quotes. We'll do that query first. Male. And my class would be CSIT-123-02, let's say. And that could be my statement, and I could get rid of this select symbol. Oh, maybe it is the right symbol. Okay, so I'm commenting out the select for now, or let's just delete it. I don't want to confuse you guys. So let's start with this command. What this will do is it will insert these values into the corresponding fields in my table. Hopefully I've written that correctly. And we will run that.
Quick question. How do you get that screen to pop up?
Oh, I'm sorry, you hit new query.
Okay.
Okay, and we run that and it runs successfully and it tells us one row was affected. Now we have this wonderful student data table with exactly one row in it. And that row is my name. And my class information. Is everybody good with this so far? All right. So how do we know I'm in there? How do we know that got added in there? I'm not going to save this query, by the way. I don't want to save this one. Well, we know it because we can look in that table. And how do we look in that table? We'll do a new query here. We're going to say select. And we're going to say all fields. Star means all fields. From student data. Okay. So when we do this, we'll see what is in student data. And there we see that my record got added successfully as a result of that last query. Okay, so now we've seen the syntax for the create table query. We've seen the syntax for the insert query, and we've seen the syntax for the select query. Okay, so before I go on, what do you notice about this select statement versus our relational algebra? Let me show you something else here. Let's say I only wanted last names from this table. I could put select last, which is the name of that last name field. And I would get just the last names of. What do you notice about that select? What is that select doing in this algebra operation? Anybody know? What relational algebra operation did we use to, yeah. It's doing a project, yeah, exactly. It's telling what fields we want from this table or relation. Okay, so in this particular case, we are doing a project. We are using the select SQL statement to do a project. Questions on that? Okay. So I want to build this student data table. Let me build this student data table more completely. First of all, I'm going to delete my record from it because I'm not really a student. So I'm going to do another query here. Delete from student data. It's as simple as that. Delete from student data. Deletes records from student data. Okay. I haven't specified any conditions on any of these things yet. Right now, I'm just selecting everything and deleting everything, right? I'm not limiting what I select or what I delete. So I'm going to run this query. And sure enough, it deletes my record from student data. Okay. All right. And by the way, if I wanted to get rid of the student data table completely, I could say drop table student data. By the way, I forgot to mention, notice if you're using something that has spaces in it, you need to put these square brackets around it, tell it that it's a single name. All right, so that's how you represent a single name in SQL. Okay, so I say drop table student data, and I can do this because I saved my create, so I can always create it again. Right, so I run drop table student data, and it completes successfully. Not going to save this one either. And when I refresh my table, you'll see that student data, that student data without the dollar sign after. All right. So, I've dropped that table because it didn't really have what I wanted in it. And I'm going to go back to my create query. This is the query we ran before. And we'll run it again. And sure enough, as if by magic, my student data table is back again. By the way, I got to zoom in on this one. Somebody told me how to zoom in on this the other day. Thank you. Control scroll. That's what it was. Thank you for telling me that. The other way. There we go. Does this work over here too? That'd be nice. Okay. So there's my create table. I ran that again and I recreate student data. So now I have an empty student data table. And how do I know it's empty? Well, the way I know it's empty is I can select star from student data and run that query. Run that query. And we'll see that an empty table is returned. Okay. So now I want to load that table with the student data that I got from my Excel file. So let's do that next. And the way that I do that is I want to, instead of inserting a single value this time, I'm going to insert the results of a select query. Great day so far, right? There we go. Operator error. All right, so instead of just selecting a value this time, and instead of just inserting a single value this time, I'm going to insert the results of a select query. And the select query in this case, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I skipped that, didn't I? You just go to this little folder here, open file, or you can go to the file menu and open file. Okay. So now I'm just going to select all of these fields from the raw student data file, which I call student data $. And I'm going to select that into my actual student data table. And we're going to run this very nice query. Oh, invalid object student data. That's probably why I renamed it last time. All right. Yeah, sometimes it doesn't like the object name you give it. All right, let's rename this thing. Let's call it what I called it last time. You can rename it by going here. It doesn't like the $. We'll call it raw student data or something like that. That's probably a better thing to call it anyway. Oh, putting in quotes, all right. Yeah, this is specific to Microsoft SQL Server. This is not part of SQL, so all right, we'll put in the quotes. Oh, is that what you did? Yeah. No, single quotes. No, that's not right. Oh, I see. Got it. All right. So let's run that. There we go. And we get 85 rows loaded. We can see that 85 rows were loaded in there. I'll save that one out. And when we create once again, we can do that select query, which I did save somewhere, but I don't want to find it, so I just type it over again. Select quote, select star from student data. Now we see that we have 85 records in there. And by the way, as we can see, when we did, because we made this not null identity 1-1, each record has been added with a unique ID that's incremented each time. Does everybody see that? Does that make sense to everybody? Everybody good with that? All right, so now we've created a very nice student data file that has information about all of our students. So, the commands that we've used so far, just to recap, is we use create table, use the insert command, insert one record into it. We use the insert command to insert the results of another statement into it. And we're using select to project the fields of student data. Does anybody have any questions on any of those operations so far? Fine. All right. So let's say I don't want all the records. I don't want to see all the records from student data. I only want to see those students. I only want to see the male students or the females. Let's do the female students. So what we do is we add a clause to the select statement. And the clause we add here in this case is where gender equals female. Okay, so I'm adding a predicate. I'm adding a predicate to this select where gender equals female. And I run this, and all of a sudden I'm not getting 85 records anymore. I'm getting 33 records, or 39 records. Sorry, you can see that here, 39 rows right down here. And you'll notice that the gender of all the records that was selected is F for female. Okay, so what is this select statement doing in our relation? Which relational algebra operation is this doing? We're doing a select, right? I mean, it's a select relational algebra operation. It has a predicate doing, get my marker out. So we're doing select. Gender equals self from student data. You guys see that one? And you see this? Do you see how those two are equivalent? Okay. Now I'm going to change this query a little bit. I just want the names. I don't care about the rest of this stuff. I just want the names of the students who are female. So I'm just going to take the last and the first. Okay, and I run that query. And sure enough, I've got their last and first name. Through all of my female students in that class. All right? Everybody understand that? Make sense, everybody? All right. So, go to my, yeah, so, if I wanted to add another field to this table, for example, let me get out of this. I'm not going to save that one. If I wanted to add another field to student data, like right now I can look at student data, I can, see through my selector or whatever, but I see I have last, first, gender, and class. If I wanted to add, enrollment date or something like that, I could add another field to this table. And the way that I would do that is I would use what's called an alter command. And the type for enrollment date would be, bear with me a second, make sure I get it right here. Here we go. Will be, I think it's called date time. I'll double check. Hang on, let me just double check this to make sure I've got the right name for it. Yeah, date time. I have to say the table name. Forgot the table name. There we go. So I'm going to add this new field to the table student data. I'm going to add a date time field that gives the enrollment date for that student. And if I run that table, if I run that query successfully, it will tell me that it completed successfully. I'll get rid of that. And if I, once again, select my records from that table, I will now see that I have a new field in that table with a null value called enrollment date. Okay, so after you define these tables, if you want to structure the table, you can do that with an alter statement. I can also get rid of that field with an alter statement. I'll type alter table student data, drop enrollment date. Drop field. Drop attribute. I think it's drop attribute. Nope. Field. Oh, drop attribute. I think. Hang on. All right, I'll have to look that one up. Bear with me a second. Let's double check here. By the way, when in doubt, all this stuff is available online. Drop column. Okay, it's called column. Sorry, column. There we go. There we go. All right, so I dropped the enrollment date column. Drop the column. Our table is back to the way it was. And meets our data definitions. There we go. All right. Any questions on this so far? On any of the commands that we've covered? We've covered create, we've covered insert, we've covered alter, and we've started to cover select. Okay. And we've covered delete. We covered delete and drop as well. So this is kind of my checklist. Okay. All right, so we also covered the select. You know, this shows the format of a select query. This select distinct is a very interesting one also. And let me show you how that one works. So if we're in this table, I can say select distinct class from student data. And when I run that query, you know, I'm projecting on class. When I run that query, oh, wait, did I use the wrong name for it? Class. There we go. When I run that query, I only get one record for each distinct value in that field in that table. Okay? So that's a handy keyword to use with select because it will give you the values in that field in that select statement. Okay. All right, now the where clause is also very interesting in SQL. So let's look at the where clause. Once again, we're going to select last name from student data. But in this case, I don't want all last names. I can say where last equals Perez, let's say. Or we'll select star where last equals Perez. That's better. Let's select star where last equals Perez. And if I run that query, I'll get all the people in my classes that are named Logan Perez and 2 students in this data table that are named Perez. That's nice. But I think we did an exercise when we loaded our table, our first table, where instead of saying equals, we said like. And we use this percent thing. Now, percent matches any string. And what this query is saying is I want all the records from student data where the last name starts with a P and has any string after it. Okay, so the like operator matches a pattern which has where the percent matches any string. So when we run that, that one's not very interesting. Let's do S star, S percent. We'll get all of the students whose last name begins with the letter S. Scott, and Sanchez, all of these various Scotts and Sanchez. You know, obviously we could select any letter we want there. W is much more interesting. Yeah, so W, we get White, we get Wilson, we get Williams, we get Wright, etc. All right, so the like allows us to match a pattern where percent is like a wild card. It matches a bunch of different things. The other wild card that we can put in here is an underscore. An underscore means any single character. So if we want to find all the students who have 5 letters in their last name, we can put 5 underscores in there. And we run that query. And we get a bunch of students who have 5 letters in their last name. Hey, how are we doing with that so far? Everybody good with this? Everybody following along? All right. Yeah, important points is that patterns are case sensitive. And, you know, it says concatenation uses a bar. So, you know, it varies from implementation to implementation. So, you know, if I wanted to say, let me see if I can do this for you. I can say select last. I think it's this way for this one. Let's see if I've done this right. Yeah. So notice I'm concatenating. Oh, you can't see that. Sorry, I'm still in slideshow mode. Let me get out of slideshow. All right, I've changed this query slightly. I want to select last and concatenate that with a comma and a space and concatenate that with a first name where last is 5 letters long. And when I do that, I get a new column. You know, I haven't named this column in this operation. But I get a column where these things are, you know, last comma first. Okay, so I can write a query that uses a string concatenation operation. In this case, it concatenates first name and last name. Okay, or hopefully I do this right also. I can make the last name uppercase by using the upper function. So there are various string operations I can do on the strings in these queries by using some of the functions that in this case, Microsoft SQL Server provides. Okay, and some of you may be asking, okay, but this thing is coming out with no column name. How do I give that column a name? Well, the way you give that column a name is you use another keyword. You use the as keyword. And you can name this thing. I'll call it full name. And I run this query, and now, that field is named full name. Okay? So you can set a formula to full name, to give it a name. And this doesn't affect the table. This doesn't change the table underneath. This is just the output of a specific query against that table. So full name, once this query runs, that thing can be used in this query, but it's gone once this query is done. Okay. And that corresponds to another relational algebra operator we learned. Was the rename operator. You guys remember the rename operator from the relational algebra section? Okay, so in this case, we're doing a rename. We're renaming this formula upper last sorry, we're renaming this formula to full name. Yeah, the student data. Okay. So that's a rename operation. Okay. Now, when you're typing these queries, you can go onto multiple lines. It helps to indent. It helps readability. You can make these queries look. If you want to, you can put the from clauses and the where clauses on different lines. I kind of like doing stuff like this because it makes the query a lot more readable. Of the query arc. Part is the check. Second part is what we're selecting it from, and the third part is the predicate. Okay. So please, when you do your queries, try to make them readable for the reader, because I will be grading them, and it's easier to read them if they're understandable. Okay. Any questions on this or any comments? Another thing that might make this more readable is putting this in parentheses. That helps. There we go. All right. And there we go, the same result. Okay, I'm not going to save this one either. All right, so we've done string operations. Null values. If a value is not set in a particular field, it's null. We don't have any null values yet. I'll get back to that later on. Aggregate functions. Okay, this one I kind of like. Okay, so we have a number of aggregate functions that we can use for this. Okay, let's do count for now. Let's bring up our table here, or our database, and we're going to do a select statement here. We're going to select class, and count of ID. From, oh, I'm sorry. I'm good at that. from student data. And we're going to use another phrase here called group by class. Okay, let's run this query and let's see what happens. Sorry, count ID, group by class. Sorry. I was right the first time. Sorry. And this tells me how many people I have in each of my classes. Counting the number of student IDs that are in each class. And I'm grouping those by class. So what I see here is I have 22 students in CSIT-123-02, 22 students in 03, 21 in 07, and 20 in section 11. Okay, and my count here has no column name because I didn't give it a column name, so I'll give it, we'll call it num students. There we go, that's better. Okay. Okay, that's all very well and good, but you know, how many of those are how many of them are female? Anybody know how I'd figure that out? Well, let's add gender in here. And we want to group by not only class, but also gender. All right, well, this is nice. I got my female student count. I've got my male student count. But, you know, this breaks it up. You know, this is not the way I want to see it. I really want this ordered by class and not by gender. So I'm going to add another phrase here, order by class and gender, and then gender. And now I find out, you know, I've got 8 females, 14 males, and 02, 12 females, 10 males, 6 females, and 15 males in 07, and 13 females and 7 males in 11. Okay. So I'm going to show you something very important here. This is going to be an error. Okay, if I tried just to do this without the group by statement, this will tell you that student data class is invalid because it's contained in it's not contained either in an aggregate function or the group by clause. Likewise, gender. So anything that you're not doing an aggregate function on, when you do one of these aggregate functions, you have to put in a group by. You know, this is what we're grouping. You're either doing an aggregate of something or you're grouping it by that thing. So class, gender, order by class, gender. All right, so I did a count here. I could have done averages. I could have done any other statistic on any other piece, sums. I could have done any other aggregate statistic on any field. But the important thing is you have to tell what you're grouping that aggregation by. You know, if I just wanted a count of all students, for example, I could simplify this. I could just say, you know, this would tell me how many students I have in the database. I have 85 students in the database. Have I totally gone too fast on this? Have I lost any of you? All right. So far, done some projects, done selects, done some rename, done some nice things with functions in here and aggregate functions. What's the main relational database or the main relational algebra function we haven't addressed yet? In your relational algebra assignments, you had selects, you had projects. What else did you have that we haven't addressed yet? Yes. Yeah, joins. Why haven't we addressed joins yet? Because so far we only have one table in this database, right? Relation. So we've got nothing to join it to yet. So I'm going to whet your appetite. In our next class, we're going to build the rest of this database. And we're going to start to look at joins between tables and what kinds of questions we can answer when we start to join multiple tables together. Okay, so right now we've been focusing on single table operations, and we'll finish up with that. But in our next class, we're going to go on to multiple operations. Okay. So we already did delete, we deleted my record from that student data table. You saw how that worked, but we could delete records based on a condition. So we could say, delete from student data, where? Just like we have a where and a select. And in this case, we're going to delete from student data where class equals CSIT-213-01. I don't teach that class anymore. I'm going to get rid of that from my database. Okay. So I run that query, and it tells me I've deleted 20 rows out of the database, which is the number of students that we counted in CSIT 12311. All right, so that's a delete with a where. Yeah. Okay. So that's how you do a delete, and those where clauses can get complex. We can insert a new tuple. We did that already. We'll do it again, but I'm going to insert into student data. Oops, got to put it in brackets. Last, first, gender, and class. Value, once again, Weiss. Oh, single quotes. Weiss. Jonathan. Male. And CSIT 123-02. Okay, once again, that is very unreadable. There we go. That's better. Let's run that. Oh, got the syntax wrong. Let me double check my syntax. Oh, values. There we go. All right, so we can use the insert command as well to alter the contents of the table. So we did that once. We just did it again just to reinforce. And we did an insert with a select. We've done that already. We're going to do an update. So, oops, Jonathan Weiss is not really in CSIT 12302. He's really in CSIT 12303. So we're going to update class in, let me make sure I get the syntax right. Oh, no, update class set. We're going to update student data. Sorry. Update student data. Set class equal CSIT-123-03, where last equals twice. Okay, so this is how I would update my class from CSIT-02 to CSIT-03. Let's run that. You know, every time I run this, by the way, I breathe a sigh of relief because, you know, sometimes I'm an old man, you know, so I don't remember syntax all the time. You know, and in other classes, I'm sorry for singling you out, Zach, but no, not Zach. I'm sorry. Mike is in one of my other classes where we're talking about how you have to memorize all these command line arguments and stuff like that. All these, Zach is in one of my classes where we talk about this. You have to memorize all these flags that you have to have on a command line. And for me, that's ridiculous because there are sources that you can go to for this stuff. Okay, so when you guys have, for example, a SQL exam or something like that, I'm going to let you refer to those sources. You know, I'm going to let you have those sources so that you know, you can check the syntax because you might not always remember the syntax exactly. And I'll be pretty lenient on syntax and sources of the syntax, but I want to make sure you write the queries, you know, with the right arguments. You know what I mean? So, you know, if you get it wrong initially, that's okay. You know, that's why I let you do it in SQL Server because SQL Server will let you know right away whether you've gotten the syntax wrong or not. But that's what we have tools like this for, you know, to check our syntax and make sure that it's correct. Okay, so that's an update. But anyway, I'm doing better than I usually do because sometimes I make syntax mistakes. You know, like you saw, I used attribute instead of column or you know, field instead of column. So, you know, I'm doing pretty well today. All right. So updates can also have a case statement. You know, you can update set salary equal to case when salary is less than 10, you know, 100,000, then set it to salary times 1.05, else set salary to 1.03. You know, you can have multiple cases like this, multiple when statements in an update. So we'll do different things based on different. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, okay. So we'll set class to 02, where last like P%. There we go. Here we go. Where class equals case. We're putting everybody, actually, the better way to do that. Here we go. This is what we'll do. We'll put everybody in A through M. That's another wild card. In CSIT 02. And we'll put everybody N through Z. In 03. else, I think we always need an else. Class equals class. Let's do that. Oh, sorry, wrong syntax. When? Oops, not where, when. The who, what, where game. Here we go. When. Then set class. I'm sorry, it's set class, right? Oh, no. One more time. See, I jinxed myself. I said I was doing pretty well until then. There we go. One more time. Beautiful. All right. So then we run this thing and let's see what, we can select the result. We'll do a new query side by side here. Select star from student data. And we can see the results of what happened there. We'll see that if you're P, if you're N through Z, you're in class 03, and if you're A through M, you're in class 02. We see that that was executed correctly. Okay. And I think I'm going to stop there. Okay, so we'll stop with the update command. We'll pick this up next class and go on from there. Does anybody have any final questions or thoughts about this? And, this is in your book. You can find this under the Introduction to SQL chapter in your book. So if you want to refresh your memory on any of this stuff, please look in your book in that chapter. Okay, and please review that chapter and read that chapter, and we'll pick this up next time. All right.